Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce to all of you the Honorable Mark Warner, Senator of the Commonwealth of Virginia and Chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Please welcome a good friend of the Commission to the stage, Senator Mark Warner.
Thank you and good morning. Bob, I have to tell you that I don't think I just merged that period where I went from like no glasses to glasses. So I want to thank you for inviting me to address the Global Emerging Technology Summit today and repeat something I'm sure every speaker will say. Great thanks to both Eric Schmidt and Bob Work, all of the members of the commission, and as Bob already indicated, the staff, who I think did a great job. This, I think, groundbreaking and thoughtful report and the recommendations that you've put forward are going to be fodder for us in Congress to actually take up this call and recognize that we need, finally, in this country, to have a theory of the case about emerging technologies and how our country, in working with our allies, can work to compete, particularly with China, and as it drives towards technological and economic preeminence in so many technology fields based on its authoritarian model. Now, I'm proud to say that, particularly when it comes to China, I will take, I guess, a chairman's prerogative and say that it was the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee that was first to ring the alarm about China's emerging dominance, particularly on 5G technology. That we suddenly woke up one day and realized that no longer was the United States or any of our particular allies leading in what was the next generation of telecom, and that unfortunately we had no single Western alternative to emerging Chinese alternatives like Huawei and ZTE. The problem is, if this was only in 5G, it would be a challenge, but maybe not a crisis. But 5G is not the only technology where we're seeing China rush ahead. And the truth is, 5G in itself underpins so much of our economic prosperity, military strength, and potentially future security threats. As we think about the Internet of Things, connected society, that all rides on a 5G network. The truth is, the United States and our allies will need to outcompete authoritarian regimes, not just China, Russia, and others, across the whole suite of technologies. What this report focuses on, the rapid growth of AI, which we all know will affect the global economy in countless ways in years ahead. It will also have serious implications, again, as the report has pointed out, on national security. We've already started to see some of these implications, from the use of AI and facial recognition to the rapid characterization of hostile military forces that can vastly shorten the intelligence cycle and enable rapid decision-making on the battlefield. Now, the question is, how did we get here? And this is just my personal premise. I would argue almost back to the moment of Sputnik. For the better part of the last half of the 20th century, the United States led in scientific research and development of transformational technologies. Our leadership translated into decades of economic success for U.S. companies and advanced military capabilities. Now, a lot of that we knew was dealt with government investment, our great universities, enormous competition in terms of ideas. But one component, as we dug into this, that I don't think was fully appreciated, and something the AI report, and I know Bob and Eric and others have brought forward. One of the things I think we sometimes in this country took for granted was, with this innovation, and so many of the last great breakthroughs in innovation, whether it's wireless, satellite, internet, you name it, we would either, if not invented here, even if it was invented somewhere else around the rest of the world, our leadership led to the United States also setting global standards and protocols for new technology. And as we set those standards, we actually, and sometimes standards is not something you think about reflects values, but as I think we've seen recently, embedded in technology standards often come a country or society's values. And what we embedded in those standards was values such as transparency, a diversity of opinion, interoperability, respect for human rights, values that made the public sphere so fruitful for innovations, and in turn, that leadership in setting standards and protocols actually drove a lot of our economic success. Unfortunately, and this is not just something that happened during the last 4 years, our dominance and leadership in a lot of those areas declined over the last decade. We've seen public investment in R&D decline. We've seen private sector willingness to kind of flood the zone on standard-setting bodies decline dramatically. And into this gap, others have stepped, China in particular, to take advantage of our absence and pursue standards, protocols, and innovation that benefited China and its companies. For example, as a former old-time telecom guy, we've seen China flooding the ICT standard-setting bodies and their leadership positions to determine standards around the internet and mobile technologies. In many ways, I would argue that they've already won in terms of the standards around 5G. I see this from my old industry in cellular. We've seen this as well in radio access. They aim to influence the next generation of technologies that not only include telecom, but AI. We've even seen the PRC working to dominate sectors of the future of renewable energy, including cornering the market already on solar, wind power, batteries, and electric vehicles. However, the past 4 years have also allowed us an opportunity for reassessing long-held assumptions. We face, I believe, a starker reality, a challenge from non-market, state capitalist authoritarian regimes led by China that have definitely exploited and undermined the rules-based international trading system that we had long thought would actually bring about greater openness and harness, unfortunately, not these new technologies for liberal means, but actually for illiberal ends. That is the challenge, I think, of the day. Now, I focus on China because not only is it the place that is where a lot of this is going on, but it also was an area where I think, as a policymaker, we were wrong. We assumed, kind of the early 20th century thinking was, the more we brought China into the international order, the more they would become like us, the more they would adhere to rules of law and the kind of presumptions that had governed a lot of technology and international governance over the second half of the 20th century. But instead of using this international collaboration to democratize, China has shown their what I call authoritarian capitalism model, whereby they allow enormous competition within the Chinese domestic market until a Chinese champion emerges. And then that Chinese champion, 5G in the case of Huawei, and we can go through a series of other technologies where this is taking place real time, that Chinese champion then gets virtually unlimited financial support from the government. And unfortunately, we've seen the development of these technologies create surveillance states that would make Orwell blush. Now, I keep talking about China, but let me be clear. And I think it is critically important that every policymaker do this if we don't play into the CCP's agenda. We make clear that my beef is not with China itself or the Chinese people, and surely not with the Chinese diaspora anywhere around the world or Asian Americans, Chinese Americans. It is with the CCP, its policies, and unfortunately, Xi Jinping. Because what we have seen is the China's Communist Party are developing a model of technological governance, a lot of this including flooding the zone back in terms of setting those standards and protocols that should worry all of us. They are doing this from one of the world's strongest economies, and again, with a set of technology tools. I keep using this analogy that would make Orwell blush. The party is using new technologies as a means of surveillance and controlling population, stifling the free flow of information, and basically as a way to sell these technology surveillance to potentially repressive regimes all around the world. These technologies have unfortunately been used to eliminate dissent, restricting religious groups, media, human rights activists, and lawyers. We see this obviously play out in Xinjiang. We see this play out with the detention of close to 1 million Uyghurs. We see this with ubiquitous cameras all across the country that, again, create this technology surveillance state. We also see it play out, unfortunately, over the last couple of years, real time in Hong Kong. China has reared a generation, though, of innovative technologists, and let's not underestimate the enormous skills and talents of the Chinese people. And in many areas, we're now seeing Chinese competitors launch both products and new technologies in advance of all Western competitors. We need, again, to think about what this means for global standard setting and liberal values of openness, transparency, reliability, interoperability, and, of course, human rights. Because, unfortunately, China sees its citizens and businesses, and again, we see this playing out real time in the news as individual businesses who've gone public or individual business leaders who are suddenly stifled. They see all of these aspects of their economy ultimately as instruments of the Communist Party. This ideology is mirrored in Chinese law, which requires all citizens and companies to act in support of national security. Unfortunately, that means ultimately China's private sector can be compelled to act on behalf of the Communist Party. And again, this is not just an occurrence that's taking place within China itself. They are exporting these tactics and values through investments and infrastructure. Think about the Belt and Road Initiative, or the Digital Silk Road. And what we're also seeing in many places, and I see this from the Intel side, they are offering these technologies as a lure to other authoritarian regimes around the world. Think about the notion. China will come in and not only build you a bridge or a road, but I'll also offer that regime a chance to monitor any of your dissidents with some of the technology they bring forward. They have used their growing global infrastructure and investments to expand their sphere of influence, gaining allies, even at times in places like Europe, bolstering their leverage, and increasing votes in standard-setting bodies around these technologies. China has deployed its economic and political resources to gather allies on the world stage. And they're doing this, again, not from an open market-based system at the end of the day, with a huge emphasis on state-owned enterprises, government subsidies, and industrial policies that actually stifle competition. China, I believe, is hoping to control the next generation of technological innovation and digital infrastructure. And it hopes to impose its values on those developments. All of this, again, I think puts into question principles of transparency, accountability, sovereignty, free, fair, and reciprocal relations. So I know there's a fairly bleak opening coming right after Bob's first comments, but let me leave you with a couple of ideas of, I think, where I hope we, and I say this in a more global sense, we ought to go. And I do think there's some good news. Now, I think there is a change, and I think we're going to see, I know you're going to hear from Secretary Raimondo, because many of the things I'm going to enumerate now, she's going to actually be in charge of implementing. And I do think, I say this not from a pure partisan standpoint, but I think many of my colleagues on the Hill would agree with this, regardless of party, because unlike the previous administration, where sometimes we seem to view our allies as enemies, and everything was posited in a us or them kind of bifurcated position, I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility to restore America's position as a global leader on technology, research, and scientific development. And the need for U.S. leadership on pragmatic, tech-savvy policy, working actually in concert with our allies, the need for this has never been greater. This moment offers us an opportunity to reassess and restate our values and priorities, especially as they relate to emerging technologies. Again, I think a lot of the work in the AI report reflects that. And actually talk about how we're going to use these emerging technologies to reinforce those values across the world. We have to do this in concert with our democratic allies. We cannot make this a choice to countries around the world of you have to choose one camp or the other. This needs a time of reestablishment of the kind of values that underpin so much of the technology development that we led in the second half of the 20th century. Because we also have to do this in the context that one of the things that's happened for many of those years, post-Sputnik, when we led, we assumed the rest of the world would automatically follow. Because in truth, while the Soviet Union was a military threat, it was never across the board a technology, innovation, and economic challenge. We've now seen those possibilities come from China. And we've also seen, particularly in recent years, just because the United States has said something, that does not mean the balance of our allies would simply follow. So what do we do? We need to recognize we cannot take on this challenge alone. We need to work particularly with democracies all around the world. We should be embedding our shared values by pursuing technology development agendas built around these shared rules, standards, and permissible uses. That means harmonizing with the EU, Japan, and other developed countries, our shared values on online privacy, on facial recognition, and, as the Commission has laid out, permissible uses of AI. We should establish, I believe, a formal technology alliance which like-minded countries that make sure that democratic-based institutions win this race. I would argue in many ways post-World War II was the age initially of military alliances. It moved into the 60s and 70s around economic alliances. I think in the 21st century, on a going forward basis, as important as those alliances will be, we need to have technology alliances. That's why last year I introduced the Democracy Technology Partnership Alliance, a version of which was incorporated into the Senate-passed U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, USICA. We've changed the name of that bill about 4 times. It was Endless Frontiers, USICA. I'm not sure what we're going to call it next week, but there is a component part of that technology alliance, and I think it frankly needs to be more robust than what we've even put in that legislation that would encourage, it would create an office at the State Department and encourage the United States government to establish a multilateral alliance focusing on technology development. And again, this technology alliance needs to go back, and I know I'm hitting the same issue time and again, on open competition, privacy, freedom of thought, respect for human rights, interoperability, and accountability, particularly when it comes to the technologies that undergird our whole economic system. One of the also things of good news, I think there is a growing recognition on a bipartisan way in the United States Congress that this will also require our government to put our money where our mouth is. And we've actually started to see that. Last year, I worked with my partner, John Cornyn, on the CHIPS Supply for America bill, dealing with semiconductors, an issue that also could generate this kind of conference and discussion. We put in as well, built into the Defense Authorization Bill, a 5G bill utilizing Strategic Allied Telecommunications Act, which would help us move beyond 5G to open radio access network. Let's jump ahead into the next level of wireless communications and set the standards and come up with the leaders. And I'm very pleased to say that in both of these areas, we put our money where our mouth is finally in USICA. $52 billion on the Senate-passed bill on chips, $2 billion on the 5G bill. The challenge is we're going to have a host of areas, from AI to quantum computing to a whole range of issues. Chris Darby saw me beforehand on bio, where we are going to need to make the kind of long-term strategic investments that will make sure that on a values-based technology race, we win that race. We need to do this in concert with our allies. We need to do this also in a recognition that, that continues to welcome the best and the brightest from around the world, including China, to be part of this technology development. I really do believe there's no issue that is more important, and the work that the Commission has done in terms of outlining, at least around AI, the challenges and opportunities is really tremendously important, and I look forward to making sure that we get these policy recommendations implemented going forward. Thank you all very much.